You have to pay for the second season, but that's worth paying for. The first season's free. Okay, we're going to do Matthew 5. I'm going to finish it off. It's a very long reading, and Robert is going to read for us. So, would you do that, sir? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Whenever you.
Huh?
Whenever you wish.
What, right now?
Oh, right now.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Thank you. You might want to read along.
As soon as my eyeglasses clear the fog. Matthew 5, the fulfillment of the law. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer who may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Adultery. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustily has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Divorce. It has been said anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. Oaths. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths that you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anyone beyond this comes from the evil one. An eye for an eye. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Love for enemies. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Which takes us up to 48.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, that finishes chapter 5. This is a dense piece. Sorry, a lot of topics. We're going to try to work through them because it takes so long to get through this book, okay? So this is kind of a compressed lesson on that. Okay, Jesus didn't come to do away with the law. He said he wouldn't even get rid of a jot or a tittle, the smallest part of the law. The law was something that he honored. But he had no tolerance for what was called the scribal law. When God gave us the 10 Commandments, or gave Moses the 10 Commandments behind me, Barclay says those were broad brush principles, okay? But for the scribes, those principles were not good enough. And so they had to explain what the law meant. And that was the scribal law. The scribal law was a man-made extension of the 10 Commandments. It was commentary on these principles, written by the scribes and followed closely by the scribes and the Pharisees. But to the people, the scribes and Pharisees were the keepers of the law extraordinaire, and they were looked up to. But Jesus comes along and he says something really extraordinary. He says, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. That was an amazing statement to make. Pharisee means separated one. They're a group of men who set themselves aside to keep all the 10 Commandments, all the oral traditions of the Pentateuch, which were the first 5 books of the Bible, which was also called the Law of Moses, and keep the interpretations that the scribes added. They were teachers. And yet, Jesus says, you have to be more righteous than they are. So the scribes and Pharisees were so afraid of offending God, they took what God gave them, and they decided to add their own insights. For instance, the explicit law up here, the 4th commandment, keep the Sabbath holy, don't work, rest. They said, well, what does work mean? So they went on and on and on to explain what work meant. If God didn't explain it outright, the scribes took it on themselves to explain it for God. So there were ridiculous rules. There were rules like if you use ink on the Sabbath and you make 2 letters of the alphabet on a piece of parchment, because that ink is permanent, you've now committed the sin of working on the Sabbath and you've broken the law. Okay? They went so far as to argue whether picking up your child was work, or taking a lamp and putting it from one place to another was work. You were allowed to cover a wound with a piece of cloth on the Sabbath, but you couldn't put salve on it first. So you could keep it from getting worse, but you couldn't make it better. That's how silly all this stuff was. And as Barclay says, these things to them were the essence of religion. So you can see why Jesus does not take kindly to this burden that the scribes and Pharisees have put on the people. There were thousands of scribal laws written down, and they were systematized or codified in what is known as the Mishnah. And the English version of the Mishnah is 800 pages long. Can you imagine keeping all those laws? And then, to make matters even more complicated, they wrote the Talmud to explain the Mishnah. So, and that was 12 volumes long. So that was a heavy yoke that these people were putting on the Jews, okay, their brothers and sisters. And then I watched a documentary last week. It was called One of Us. There's a Hasidic Jewish community that lives in Brooklyn, and they, oh, you know about that? You don't, oh, okay.
Just know about what they do. I don't know the documentary.
Oh, okay. And they abide by strict standards. They're not allowed to take their kids to the library. Their kids are not allowed to read secular books, you know, like Cat and Hat or whatever. They can't own cell phones. They can't use the internet. Some of the younger community members want to escape this lifestyle, but they're ostracized when they do. And this strictness comes from their parents and their grandparents. Their fear of having walked through the Holocaust. And so they're afraid that if they move away from these very strict rules, they might walk through another Holocaust again. They have to stay together. They have to separate themselves from the world. And that means observing all these rules. But back in Jesus' day, that same fear of offending God might, I'm not sure this is true, but I'm wondering if this also caused them to try to obey all these scribal laws. Because twice Jerusalem was sacked. First by the Babylonians before Jesus, and then by the Romans after Jesus. And fear drives people to protect themselves. Okay? So, consequently, maybe if we keep enough rules, we may not offend God. Or so they thought. Okay? But Jesus comes along and he unwinds this whole system. He wants the people to obey the Ten Commandments, no doubt. But he undoes the scribal laws because he wants people to obey the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. He never broke a commandment himself. Okay? But he broke the rules the scribes had organized, and he was chastised for doing it. For instance, he healed on the Sabbath. Okay? According to the scribes, that was considered work. He allowed his apostles to pick grains of wheat when they were walking through a field without washing their hands. That violated or defiled the cleanliness laws the scribes had written down. But Jesus, it wasn't about religion. Okay? It was about his Father's commandments, which were simple and concise. He exemplified what part of the law was. He showed us. When I was a teen, I babysat for a family. I can't remember their names now, but they had 5 kids. And their house was pretty well organized, but it was very greasy. And she had a plaque on her wall, which I thought was wonderful. It said, my house is clean enough to be healthy and dirty enough to be happy. And so she understood the essence of a happy home. Okay? Barclay, I think, kind of nails it. He says it best when he says the essence of the law is really reverence. Reverencing God the Father's name, not taking it in vain. Revering, revering, I'm going to use the word revering. Revering one's parents. Okay? Revering another's property. Revering a person's good name. Revering oneself. And revering a neighbor. Okay? That's enough. That's all you need to do. So the scribes sought to obey earthly rules, but Jesus sought to obey heavenly rules. So, how did Jesus get away with this? How did he get away with this new approach to God? It's because he had authority. Okay? He spoke with authority that no one else had ever spoken with before. The scribes and the Pharisees, the rabbis, they would always quote somebody when they taught, somebody who preceded them. They never expressed their own opinions. But Jesus is his own authority. And he would say, you've heard it said, but I say to you. So he was his own authority. And it came from the Father. He wasn't concerned about 1,000 do's and don'ts. He didn't have to quote another person because he was authority. Okay? He taught that the inner man had to match the outer man when it came to obeying the law. It wasn't good enough to not take another's wife, but you couldn't even think about doing that. You had to be good to the core. And you couldn't be good to the core by keeping 1,000 scribal rules, but by having a pure heart. Okay? Jesus is saying you can't even lust after a woman, let alone seduce her. So he's saying your thought life counts. Okay? You got to be same on the inside as you are on the outside. That's a hard task. I remember one time we were having a Catholic priest for dinner, and we were short of potatoes. At the last minute, I ran to a neighbor and I said, do you have a potato I could have, or a couple potatoes? She gave me this hulking, beautiful, huge potato. I've never seen one. It must have weighed a couple pounds. And I thought, oh, this is great. I don't need a bag. I just need this one plus those few back home. Well, I took it back and I scrubbed it, and then I cut it because I was going to boil them. The inside was totally rotten. So the outside was deceptive. The inside was a total waste. Okay? And Jesus is saying the inside, the outside, got to be the same. You got to be the same. So he sets a high standard for us. But the point is, we can't do this on our own. We just can't. Because, you know, we think bad things, we say bad things, we feel bad things, we do bad things. That's the human condition. And Jesus says, yeah, it can be done. It can be done. Follow me and I'll show you how. But we can't do it on our own. So God is the one that has to transform our minds. Okay? Only God can change us. John the Apostle was called the son of thunder. When Jesus first met him, Jesus is the one who named him. Because he had a quick, angry response to things that didn't sit well with him. But by the end of his life, at the age of 90, he closes his sermon with little children, love one another. So the inside had become what the outside was beginning to look like too. He became one consolidated person in the Lord. Now the Hammurabi Code, which was written by a Babylonian king, was the rule of law in Jesus' time. It was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Okay? And a judge was the one who would determine what punishment or how to mete out justice to an offender. And it sounds rational, right? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Sometimes I think that might stop a lot of garbage going on right now, but it also sounds harsh. And until recently, I didn't realize the code was written to be a deterrent from doing harm to others. An eye for an eye was not written for revenge. It was just made people stop and think before they did something stupid. Because if you were so angry you're going to punch somebody and knock his eye out, you got to stop and think twice, because just maybe you might lose an eye because of that. So it was really supposed to be a deterrent. But Jesus comes along, and he does away with that code. Okay? He talks about the law of love. If your mind and your heart are transformed, you're walking in love. And that's what God intended. The level of perfection that he calls us to is always going to be a challenge, because we make steps forward and then we make steps back, and it's just this constant back and forth as we're moving along the way. It's kind of like a sound wave. You know, it goes back and then it goes forth and back and forth until eventually it hits your ear. Okay? We need Jesus. We need him. We can't redeem ourselves. We can't keep the law perfectly. We need him to live within us and take us over or take over. St. Paul got to such a place that he was able to say, I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but
He, Jesus, who lives in me.
Christ lives in me.
Christ in me.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, when you really ponder that, and I have, that's really profound. I hope one day I can actually say that. I don't live any longer. Christ lives in me. I mean, we're on the way, but I am certainly not there yet. Plato likened the soul to a charioteer with two horses. One horse is agreeable and it does the driver's bidding or the rider's bidding. The other is wild and rebellious. And I'm guessing that we're of two minds, kind of like those horses. There are two sides of us striving to work together. And then one day, hopefully, we will settle into one heart with one movement that works together as it should. So Jesus moves to another topic. He talks about murder. Okay, Jesus would have us honor one another and not destroy another's reputation, because in his book, that's akin to murder. He says God alone is the judge of man. God alone knows the heart. We can only judge what we see, and most often we do not see through God's filter. We see through our own filter, and ours is pretty skewed. Barclay says we can mistakenly edify a man who looks really good on the outside, but he says who knows what lurks in his heart. God alone can read the heart, and God alone can judge. Therefore, we shouldn't put people down, we shouldn't call people a fool, and we shouldn't judge another's soul, because you never, ever know what's really going on inside. Okay, the next thing we move to is 3 important topics, and I think that these 3 are all related. These are hard topics: adultery, divorce, and oaths. And I think probably because Jesus goes into oaths at the end of these 2 other things, I think he's kind of trying to tie these together. Jesus gives us one admonition to deal with these 3 topics in my book, okay? He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, okay? I had a dream a few weeks ago. It was very, very disturbing. I dreamt, and in fact, it was so disturbing the next day was just a mess. I mean, that's how bad this dream was. I dreamt about divorce, and I remember the profound sense of sadness and betrayal that I felt because my husband divorced me. And the sense of loss and hurt was really, really beyond description. And it was just a dream. It so undid me the next day. It was awful. But I said, Lord, why did I have that dream? And I think I needed to know the pain that people walk through when they've gone through one. Divorce is hard. It's really hard. I looked up the stats on divorce on a legal website, and these were the statistics. There's one divorce approximately every 36 seconds. That's nearly 2,400 divorces per day, 16,800 divorces per week, and 876,000 divorces a year. Okay? The divorce rate for the first marriage is 41%. The divorce rate for the second is 60%, and the divorce rate for the third is 73%. That's a lot of divorce. These rates are astounding, really. And they break God's heart. They really break his heart. If what I felt in just a dream I had could so undo me, just think about the pain that people are actually walking through who've gone through a divorce. I just have so much more understanding now because I haven't had to deal with it. I also think this dream, the Lord gave it to me to show me what he, the Lord, feels like when we walk away from him. We commit adultery when we choose the world over him. That's adultery. He's supposed to be the bride. Or excuse me, we're the bride. He's supposed to be the groom. Okay? We divorce him by putting him aside for the world and for ourselves. And we do it because when we take an oath to follow him, we don't keep our oath. Okay? Jesus says, don't even take an oath unless you intend to keep it. It's better not to take one than to break it because it causes so much pain. So if we don't think that God is terribly pained when we turn away from him, we fooled ourselves. He says he is a jealous God. And for good reason. He loves us enough to give us everything, his very, very best. He gave us his son. The least we can do is give him our hearts for good and forever. I don't know if any of you here, I certainly have a person in my life who I seem to give and give to, and there's just like, it's not received, and it hurts, it really hurts. And I think we do that to the Lord. I think we need to really be cognizant of that. Okay, the next two topics spoken of in this chapter are going the second mile and loving your neighbor. I think they're best summed up in the words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if someone slaps you in the face, what does the scripture say? Turn the other cheek, right? Okay. I don't think it means to stand back and let somebody pummel you. I don't believe that. That's not a godly thing to do. I think Jesus is saying when someone hurts you, let it go. Okay? Don't go back after them. God sees what they're doing, and he will deal with it in his time.
And
yeah.
And they'll help you. They'll deal with you with whatever you're going through.
Yes. Yes. In fact, that just hit me in the face last night. I was looking at Chuck's obituary online, and I saw this article from a church back in Broomfield where we were. And I don't know who wrote the article, but somebody accused him of walking away and causing the church to become a mission and taking the funds to buy a new building, which is absolutely not true. Somebody got really angry that we walked away because the big givers walked away with us, and they decided to try to sour his reputation. That's extremely hurtful to me because I know the truth. But, I was getting myself riled up last night. And I said, Lord, guess I'm teaching myself today because it's something I had to put down. I had to say, Lord, I give it up. You deal with that. You deal with that. So when somebody hurts you, don't go back after them. He sees what they're doing, and he will get them in his time. Okay? Or he will deal with them in his time. He will be the one to mete out the justice. And lastly, he talks about loving one another. He says, treat others like you would like them to treat you. And that's easy to say. It's not always easy to do, especially if you have somebody who's a challenge for you or who's a thorn in your side. And I know every person in this room has had a thorn in their side. Yeah. But what happens when you want revenge and you make it a point of being a thorn in their side? What's the outcome of that?
Pain for you.
Pain for you.
Comes back at you.
Mm-hmm.
Either with that person or that somewhere else, because it's an attitude of the heart.
Yeah. It's hard.
I just heard yesterday somebody say that, and I've heard this before, but unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.
Yes. In fact, I had it right here. That was Joyce Meyer.
Okay.
Joyce Meyer, who's a wonderful Bible teacher, she says, revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's so true. I mean, that's a great analogy. God can distribute justice so much better than we can. And Jesus says, strive to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That's hard. Can it be done? Yeah. But it's a process. It's called sanctification. Okay? It's a long slog, but we can do it. And he led the way for us. Okay, so we finished chapter 5. Praise the Lord. That took a long time to get through. I have a question for you, though. We had talked about salt and light 2 weeks ago, and I asked you to consider, if you had any experiences with being salt or light to somebody, or having someone be salt and light to you. If you had anything you could share in the last few weeks.
I think perhaps that's, as a father, that one hopes to do that for one's children. And perhaps I've seen some evidence of that in the past couple of weeks. And I pray that that's the case. But perhaps, yes.
I would say it's more than perhaps. I think that parents are salt and light to their children. Often. Okay? And I'm sure their children at times are salt and light to them too. When we had that bad snowfall that closed last week, the church, my twin brother, who used to be strong, is not strong anymore, but he got out there and started digging out the driveway, and it was so cool. All of a sudden they see this huge snowblower in our driveway. I thought, where'd that come from? There was a little lady, 2 doors down, who had this big snowblower. She did our driveway.
Wow.
And so I thought, wow, I've only met her one time in 7 years, and I didn't even know her name. And so she was definitely salt and light. And I thought, Lord, that's gotta be from you, because there are all these other people up and down the street out there trying to dig their driveway. And she came to us. And she went back home, and she didn't help anybody else. And I thought, what a good example of salt and light. So little things can be salt and light. I know somebody in this room, I won't say who does laundry for somebody else, which I think is lovely, because that person cannot do their laundry. And I'm guessing if you were to honestly step back and kind of examine your lives, you'd find out you're a whole lot more salt and light than you think you are. Okay? And that's what God calls us to be. Okay, anything specific about salt and light? That anybody do anything really kind for you recently? No?
My neighbor also got his snow blower out and cleared my driveway out.
Yay! Yay for we women, for us women. Yeah, wait for us. Yeah, well, God calls us to be that, and so think about that for a little bit. I was really thrilled to see the episode of The Chosen last night, and that was what Jesus talked about, being salt and light. I thought, woohoo! So anyway, Tammy and Gay, you weren't here when I first mentioned it, but if you have an opportunity to watch The Chosen on Amazon Prime, it is wonderful. It is really wonderful. Please do. Okay? So we are finished early.